In those 7 days, it felt like I was doing years and years of therapy, or years and years of introspection.
It's like a rebirth, Omar, in effect.
It felt exactly like a rebirth when I stepped out of the cave. Ultimately, any work that you do or any projects that you're doing, ultimately it's going to be about relationships. And so when people start to connect with you more, they're more likely to want to work with you. They're more likely to want to spend time with you.
It's interesting, Omar, because I'm hearing a person who is much more reflective than when we last spoke. Welcome to What I Did Next from A&T Media. I'm Malak Fuad, and I'm super excited to be kicking off 2025 with one of our new segments. We're calling it What I Did Next Encore. And here, I check in with some of your favorite alumni guests. A reminder that these Encore episodes will be members only going forward. So if you'd like to hear more from your favorite alumni, which includes, just for starters, Ahmed Elfi, Nada Dibs, Ali and Amy Muefi, subscribe now to our members club so you can get this and all of our bonus episodes throughout the year. I first spoke to Omar in 2021 about his company, Wild Guanabana, and his epic maritime challenge with Omar Nour, which they successfully parlayed into an award-winning documentary. We picked up this new conversation right where we left off on that episode.
The time I was living in Cairo, I think we had met in my Maadi apartment. I'd moved there, and I always had the idea that if I ever left Maadi, I'm not from Maadi originally. I moved there after COVID. It seemed like the right place to be. But once I spent some time there, I had a feeling that if I ever left Maadi, I would leave Cairo altogether. And which ended up being exactly what happened. There was a vision to live somewhere quieter, to slow down the pace of my life, and to be close to nature. So to have a very kind of seamless access between the indoors and the outdoors, that I could be somewhere where I could just essentially open the door and I'll just be out in nature. I can, see the stars, see the sun rise and set every day. I knew right away that in order to be able to do that, there was going to be some compromises, that I wasn't going to be able to have my cake and eat it completely. And it was just a question of prioritizing the things that I wanted to do and what was most important. And the things that I just shared were actually the most important. And also for my daughter especially, I remember the way that we grew up as kids and the kind of safety that we had to roam around and I used to spend, most of my days finnedi, that was kind of like my thing. And that's all of our upbringing, and
yeah, everyone of our age group kind of lived like that.
Yeah, and it was a very different time. I mean, I used to be I think when I was 8, 9, 10 years old, I used to take cabs and and go places, and that was considered normal. If you
absolutely.
do that now, you'd be considered a kind of a parent who doesn't really have, it's not very responsible. And we'd spend all of our days in the Nadi and all of this stuff. This is the kind of life that my daughter gets to experience here because of the remoteness of the location, because it's quiet, because it's full of sort of like-minded people, and it's quite safe. So she gets to have that life, and I get with her friends, and I get to see that every day. So that gives me great pleasure to do that. Like I said, it took a while for me to be able to set up my life in the way that it is now.
And tell me, Omar, your actual work is now centered on what?
So my work you can be divided into two things. There's my company, which is Wild Guanabana, WG for short. And then there's my sort of personal work, personal brand kind of work. With WG, there's two elements. One was the tour operating company, which runs trips and camps and so on. And this has been going on since 2009. So in order for me to be here, I had to still kind of be the custodian of the vision and the strategy and so on and so forth, but had to be able to sort of work on myself to have the wherewithal to then say hey, this team that's been working on this for some years and so on can do it by themselves, and they don't need me to.
Is that because your nature is to micromanage and to kind of want to be involved in all aspects?
No, I don't want to do that. But I have to say I'm not the most proficient like manager out there. And so I'm very good at conceiving of ideas and birthing them into existence. But it's a challenge for me to both to grow and to scale businesses. And so it doesn't come naturally to me. So I always struggled with, okay, how can I extricate myself from the day to day? But when I was able to put the move here and so on as kind of a goal, that kind of gave me the impetus. Because otherwise, if everything remains unchanged, you can be like, well, I'm here. I'll always be involved, and there's no real pressing need. So that created the need for that. It was another type of business that started in 2019 under WG as well, that actually saw us through COVID, because the tour operating camps and so on stopped completely for quite a while. And that's the consulting side, which is the side where we were advising governments on their ecotourism strategy, on developing trails. So, walking trails, hiking trails.
I hadn't realized that was part of your business at all.
It's not a part that we market heavily, because it's very B2B, and we work with
B2B
governments and so on. So we have a reputation in the market. People know us, so we get projects this way.
And are you working with governments in the Middle East mainly, or all over?
Well, our team has worked on projects in Jordan, in Greece, in Australia, in Egypt to a smaller extent, just because of the challenges of doing these types of projects here. But mainly our bread and butter over the last few years has been Saudi.
That's super interesting, Omar, because I think it must be a very fulfilling part of the business for you, because you're seeing some long-term, things being laid down, right?
So the interesting thing about it was that we basically did what we did from 2009 all the way to 2019. So 10 years doing the operating side, not knowing that actually everything that we've done and the skill that we gained has basically set us up perfectly to be able to do this type of large scale kind of project work. And so we go in sort of, let's say, virgin territory. We scout trails, we map them, we create the storylines and narratives around these trails, and we can take it all the way until we build those trails. And so we actually ended up, so now it's been a few years, we've developed probably more than 2,000 kilometers of trail in Western Saudi Arabia. I think we've put in more trails there than any other entity combined. We've done a lot of our partners, my partner and the team have done a lot in Greece and in Jordan. So that's been great, because that kind of saw us through COVID when the tour operating stuff, people weren't coming, there was no tourism, but government still felt like this is the time to build the infrastructure. The beauty of this type of work, it's first of all, it's project based, and it's more demanding on my knowledge and network and expertise, but not necessarily on my time. So pound for pound, I'm working less in terms of time. However, I'm able to add more value.
Of course, it's a win-win.
And then there's the other aspect, which is the stuff that I do on a personal kind of level. So we're talking my public speaking. We're talking about I was part of a couple of podcasts.
I remember that you dabbled in podcasting at one point. You had one with your wife, right?
Mint, and I did one. This was a relationship podcast called Il Alaqa, which is kind of like, tackling kind of taboo topics and challenging topics within the relationship space. I'd done one with Omar Nour, who was my partner in the rowing expedition. And this one was, because we already had the documentary, which was
unbelievable.
Thank you.
It's left such a mark on me, actually, and I keep telling everyone to go watch it. And I remember when we chatted the first time around, you were looking for a distributor, but I think you found, didn't you, afterwards?
When we spoke, we had already locked a Middle East distributor, and our movie was on Netflix in the Middle East. What we were challenged with was trying to get the movie to go global. And then after a little bit of a hiatus, we finally had a big theatrical release in the UK and in the US. And that was earlier this year. And on the back of it, we were able now to have the movie show up on sort of all the main streaming platforms. And I think so that brings the journey of the movie to an end.
And then, so the podcasting is ongoing, or is it something that you tried and moved on from?
I don't have the same kind of. I knew that didn't have the same kind of discipline, and my life was not set up in a way where I could do an indefinite sort of weekly or podcast or that kind of thing. And so I would just approach it very consciously. Here's the topic that I'm very passionate about. This is something that I want to add to, and so let's put together. In the case of State of Mind podcast, that was 6 episodes.
So it's like a limited edition, like like print. When you're buying print, you have limited editions. It's like,
and it was done consciously with like really great production companies. So Ila Alaqa was done with Womena, which is a really amazing feminist media platform in the Middle East. And State of Mind was done with Kerning Cultures, who also kind of really knew what they were doing and were able to really elevate the content. And it meant that Omar and I and the other one, Mint and I, could just walk in and just kind of, do our...
And just start. Yeah.
Essentially, I was very mindful that, okay, with the podcasting, it's not about building sort of my podcast or my platform or anything like that. It's like I want to contribute.
So tell me, I know that this year, I don't know if I'm missing something in between, but this year you decided to go on a retreat. Let's talk a little bit more in depth about that, because I don't know anything about it. I just saw some of the clips you put on Instagram when you came out of your retreat. I want to know, why did you do it? And was there something you were trying to achieve with it? And then tell me about the journey itself.
I remember seeing somebody that I know come out of this retreat. And just for the audience, it's a darkness retreat, which means you spend anywhere between 2 to 6 or 7 days alone in a dark cave by yourself, with no other obviously light source, but no other kind of stimulus or anything to distract you.
Are you alone?
You're alone. You're completely alone. There's somebody that sort of checks in with you more or less every 12 hours to put the food for the day. So there's kind of they come behind the wall, and then there's a cupboard essentially which you can open and close from either side. So they open it from one side, put the food for the day, close it, and then you open it on the other side, and that's how you access your food. It was it's in Oregon, in a place called Ashland, and it's essentially this big plot of land, beautiful plot of land that has these 3 caves built into the ground. And I want to say, when I signed up for it, it was just one of these things, and this has happened to me many times in my life, where I encounter an idea that's just enthralling, and I find myself really drawn to it. And I've learned over the years never to doubt this kind of feeling, and just to go kind of dive in head first. So I signed up right away with, I would say, minimal information, but just it felt like it's something that kind of really struck me.
But that's probably the best way, Ahmad, because if you do too much research, you're going to get cold feet. Maybe
you get cold feet, but also then you get too much into your head. And especially with an experience like this, it's a full-on somatic body experience. The whole idea is to depart from your head and to really try to connect with yourself. However, when I saw it, I looked at it. There was part of it was curiosity, and then from another perspective, there was a bit of a challenge, as in, can I actually do this? Can I actually withstand sort of a week in the darkness by myself?
And was it up to you to decide how many days to do?
Yeah, I mean, being me, I asked the guy, what is the maximum possible time that I can do as a first timer? And he said a week is like your absolute maximum. So I said, thank you very much, I'll do a week. He tried to dissuade me to do 3 days or 4 days, but also I'm traveling so far to get to this place. So I really wanted to, and I'm waiting a year plus to do it. So I really want to. Interestingly, the timing of when the timing was predetermined, a year before or more, but miraculously, in terms of what was going on in my life, it ended up being the absolute perfect time to go this in a there was a lot of things that I needed to confront, and there was a lot for me to make sense of in my life, and it just happened at the perfect time. And it so happened that then when I went into it and came out on the other side, I realized, wow, the reason why I was supposed to do this and what I got out of it were almost completely different from how I imagined it and what I thought I wanted to get out of it.
That's fascinating. Can you share with us what you expected and then what actually you felt at the end?
I thought it was a spiritual experience. What ended up being that it was actually, it wasn't a spiritual experience at all. It was a body experience.
In what sense? What do you mean?
The exercise of being there in the cave by yourself for that long, it's an exercise of training your felt sense. So you realize that the body has so much wisdom, and when you give it the chance and you give it the opportunity, it knows so much about what's going with you at any point in time. It knows about what trauma needs to be released, where it is, what kind of emotion. It understands if this is something recent or something happened from your childhood. It knows what to do to be able to clear these things. And so I kind of started theorizing after I got out of the cave, and I realized, well, the human body and the human mind hasn't really developed for thousands of years. We're essentially the same hardware. Some of things have changed. We've evolved in some ways. There's this culture, heritage, there's all kind of things that have been sort of.
But the foundation is the same.
Yeah, I mean, the invention of electricity is only quite recent, right? So if you go before that, essentially people lived half of their life in darkness, or maybe with some very kind of torches and candles and so on, right? So your human body was made to spend half of the day in the light. The light gives you vitamin D, gives you like joy, gives you this, gives you that, gives you so much, gives you be able to see and to interact with people and so on. And the dark gives you something that people have not explored, because people usually repel at the idea of being in the dark. Certainly, I was afraid of the idea of being in the dark by myself in a cave for a whole thing.
I think we all just think of being in the dark now when we sleep. We don't consciously choose to spend time in the dark, alert and conscious.
Absolutely. What I realized that when I was in the dark and completely consumed by it, I was initially thought that I would have some trepidation, or that would be a scary place to be, but then I was really embraced by it. And I found it such like the most beautiful, most serene place. And the relationship that I managed to cultivate with myself in the darkness was the most soft, most tender that I've ever been with myself. In fact, I was able to unpack so much in the darkness, because when you strip away everything, you start to realize that, one of the things that really struck me, just to get a bit specific, is I realized that there are things in life that I've, done, for example, that I feel, that I shouldn't have done, or have guilt around or shame around, just like any person. And then there's my feeling of who I am as a person. And for most of us, at least for me, those two things were very enmeshed. So my opinion of myself is very much linked to what I've done and how I've experienced life and the decisions that I've made. However, inside the cave, I was able to see these two things as very separate things. Being able to see myself for who I am as a, this vessel, or this kind of, entity, but at the same time, be able to look objectively at my decisions. And when those two things became separated, what grows in this space is essentially like self-love.
And what's interesting, Omar, is that the things you've done in the past, whether it's climbing mountains or whether it's crossing oceans, there's always been a physical active element to it. So you're alone in some of those situations, but you're being challenged and you're trying to battle the elements in some way. Whereas where you are in the cave, you have nothing to do but think, right? And be still. So you reach a different, point of who you are in that situation.
Yeah. So what they tell you is, like, first of all, you realize that there's nothing to challenge, because you go into the cave, there is no aim, there's nothing to achieve, there's nothing to do. And what your mind wants you to do in the beginning is to think and to plan and to, so you go into, first of all, you go into, okay, I'm going to eat now, and then I'm going to stretch, and then I'm going to meditate, and then I'm going to do this. Then you realize you're missing the entire point. So in this kind of vacuum that you live in, where you kind of have no sense of time and space, you're then invited to this very sacred place where you can just sit and then just kind of start. It's a somatic experience where you start to feel like, what's happening in my body? Oh, I feel that there's something happening, around my solar plexus, and I see this is moving into my abdomen, without trying to question what that feeling is, unless it's glaringly obvious, like that's sadness or that's fear, and trauma that is essentially from childhood or from the past in general is energy that's stuck in our bodies, and it's waiting to be resolved, because when you had that emotion, whether it was fear or anger or whatever, you never allowed this emotion to completely have its cycle. What animals do is they shake or they do something, and they let go of whatever they need to let go of right in that moment. We don't. We hold on to the things. And so, but the body has this wisdom, even if it's something that's happened, tens of years ago, it understands that there's something that needs to be resolved. And so just by sitting in the darkness, observing your body and allowing these things to happen, you start to like reconnect with yourself in a completely kind of different way. And there was a lot of grief actually that I had from how I carried myself through these years, how hard I have been on myself all these years.
And you found yourself letting go of that during that time?
I let go of so much. Like in those 7 days, it felt like I was doing years and years of therapy, or years and years of introspection.
It's like a rebirth, Omar, in effect.
It felt exactly like a rebirth when I stepped out of the cave, because also then there's that moment when the guy comes in from behind the wall and says, all right, it's time. And you put this, so you wear this really dark mask. You may have seen it in the video, and you get out of the cave. The guy holds your hand, sits you on a chair, and he's right, all right, when you're ready, you can remove the mask. And the first thing you think about is like, I don't want to remove it.
You're scared to remove it, right?
It's not you're scared to remove it. It's like the darkness has now become such a beautiful place that you just don't want it to, that it's about to end, and you just want to savor it.
You want to hold on to it more.
And then when I took the mask off, it was exactly like you were saying. It was like seeing everything for the first time, hearing everything for the first time, feeling everything. Everything was heightened, and the cave is set in this beautiful kind of nature kind of place. So you're looking at this beautiful view, and I couldn't stop like the tears from flowing, the emotions, and I think it's given me something that still lives with me. And what I was saying is that going back to the point that I was making, we were designed to spend so much time in the dark because the dark gives us these things, and that was part of what we need to do. So then all of a sudden you replace half of your life, which you're supposed to spend in darkness, and you're constantly bombarded with light and screens and kind of so much stimuli that your body doesn't have the chance to use this amazing gift that nature gives us 50% of the time, or third of the time.
Omar, when you're talking, it makes me think especially of our children, who my children are a little older than your daughter, but they're still raised with this constant stimulation of machines and screens and blue light all day long and all night long. Wouldn't it be amazing if there was like an educative program that combined this kind of retreat for our kids, where they learn to let go of all this stuff and just be in the moment and be still? It would be amazing if they could be taught this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what we need to be taught actually is, a lot of us live through our life and we don't necessarily have a relationship with our own body. We occupy our body, but we live in our head all the time. And I didn't really understand what it means and what it feels like to actually be in the body. And they call it like to be embodied, for example. And, I would say, if someone had have asked me, I would have said, yeah, sure. I mean, I'm in my body. I mean, Yeah, but the when you get to experience that, you feel it on a very different level. And when you're talking about kids, I think, I mean, obviously a darkness retreat is on one end of a spectrum in terms of the extremity of it. However, like even in my company, we're constantly, taking kids into the outdoors, having them camp for multiple days at a time. And, even in that type of experience, they let go of so much and they reconnect, so much.
Yeah. And how have you used this experience going forward? Did it make you think of a new way that you want to approach living?
100%. I think it's kind of gave me more conviction towards the path that I had kind of already began on. I've been very much, like obsessed with the idea of slowing down, of decluttering my life, trying to operate at the frequency that us human beings were always meant to operate on. And what's actually happened for me over the last year or two is that when I slowed down, I mean, first of all, like when I completely had to stop forcefully after COVID, and then had to start back again, I couldn't believe how much I was doing. I couldn't do it. I didn't realize how much I was like, there's no way I can get up to that level. But now I've realized that there is so much more like abundance in doing less. Now that I'm slowed down, doing a fewer things with more intent. My biggest fear was like, I'm not going to be able to generate as much, money to provide for my family. I'm not going to be able to do this or that. But I realized that actually it's been the complete opposite. It's and I think it's when you operate at that level and you are then able to not be in your head all the time, what it also means is that you're able to connect with people that you meet, whether it's your friends or people you're meeting through work or acquaintances and so on, at a much more deeper level where they can actually feel you. And so ultimately, any work that you do or any projects that you're doing, ultimately it's going to be about relationships. And so when people start to feel you more and connect with you more, they're more likely to want to work with you. They're more likely to want to spend time with you.
It's interesting, Ahmad, because I'm hearing a person who is much more reflective than when we last spoke. I think as we get older, we all reassess where we want to go forward. And I think those COVID years are very instrumental, have been instrumental for everybody. You decide what path you want to go on. And I think when it hits at our age, we've all had a backstory of some kind. We all had a career of some kind, but we're at that point where you reassess and do you really want to keep going this way or not? And I'm hearing someone who's really looking at a different way completely.
It's very true. And you know what's the kind of the paradox is that like the darkness is a very obviously solitary experience, but actually what it made me realize also is how much we're hardwired for connection and community.
Yeah.
Because when I was able to really access myself, I was able to connect with people on a deeper level. And I realized that I had been isolating myself. There's a big difference between solitude and isolation. And so many times when I was going on these big adventures and doing these things, some of the times I was running away from something. Or I was trying to, I remember when, some of my biggest pain when my wife passed away, I remember this vividly, like two of my best friends, one of them, very well, Muhammad came, and I think he was the one who introduced us, came and knocked on my door because he wanted to spend, like him and another friend of mine wanted to spend time with me. And there was nothing more in the world that I wanted than to be with them and to have them hug me and sit with me and to hold space for me. But I was at such a place that I couldn't get myself to open the door. I preferred to suffer by myself than to allow myself to seek help or to.
You weren't ready.
Sometimes we treat ourselves and we speak to ourselves in a way that like we would never imagine ourselves saying or that to another person or treating another person in that way. And so I was able to kind of to see it for what it was, and I was able to take a kind of a decision of I'm going to show up very differently for myself going
Yeah,
forward.
I think it's very lucky that you were able to do that, because a lot of people go through their lives without ever having that self-awareness at all. So I think that was very lucky, actually. I want to move on, Omar, to a much lighter part of our catch up. I want to talk to you firstly about who was the most influential person in your life, or like a mentor.
I think definitely, like for my younger years, my mother would be the person that I would say. Um, she she was always a person who was very selfless. Like her work was very much in the field of development. She worked with special needs. Both my sisters were special needs themselves, and I always marveled at the idea that she could put in so much effort and time, and not expect anything in return. And so she was definitely an inspiration. But she also started working in that field at a time when it was a taboo.
Yeah.
And even when she would go on TV interviews and so on and talk about my sisters, her friends and family would tell her, like, that's not something to spread and talk about. You need to keep it to yourself. And so she, by doing that, she empowered other parents and so on
Yeah.
to get out of that shame idea, and to put this whole conversation in a different space. And so that was her basically going against the grain. And even though I went against the grain in a very different way, in a way that actually troubled her quite a bit, also because it had a lot of, I was taking on a lot of risk and so on. But it was, in some ways, it was her influence. And it was it. So these are kind of some of the things that she did that were very positive that influenced me. Other things, she was also very overprotective over me because of my sisters. And I was, the first quote unquote, like, normal child in the family,
able-bodied.
But that also drove me to an extreme, because I then had a bit of a chip on my shoulder to prove to myself that I didn't need all this protection, and I could, do it by myself. So she was definitely a very big.
And anyone professionally that you can pinpoint that was a guiding light in some way for you?
Not really. I kind of struggled with that quite a bit, because I'm a bit of a bit of a jack of all trades. Like, I don't have anything that I could say that that's my vocation, that's my specialty. So, and I always tried to find somebody that I could model like my life around, and sort of make decisions by kind of observing how that person did this or that. And actually, one of my biggest learnings was to kind of like let go of the idea of like
role models and just do your own thing,
do my own thing. And that kind of freed me up to to make decisions and to step into spaces where I would probably wouldn't have made any sense.
I think being a generalist as well, I consider myself a generalist. It allows you the freedom of movement, right? You're not typecast. You're not in a straitjacket of a profession or a vocation. You have that ability to try this, try that, jump here, jump there, and it gives you a sense of freedom. Yeah. So if you were to choose a profession other than what you're doing, what would you pick? For me, for example, I always secretly wanted to be a lawyer. I have no idea why, but I like the idea of using, law and the legal system to correct wrongs. That's my kind of missed profession, if you like. What would it be for you?
Two things come to mind: an anthropologist or an astronaut.
Yeah.
I think the anthropology, I'm really interested in the idea of how topography influences culture and how people behave, and language, and so on and so forth. So, for example, like I've seen, having traveled quite a bit around the world, like seeing how people that live in the mountains, even on opposite ends of the earth, they embodies very similar characteristics and very similar sort of behaviors, versus people who live on the coast, for example, or and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
That would have been something that I would have loved to delve into and study, or actually have done all of these trips and adventures that I did, but having had that lens, that expert lens, to see it through.
It's a bit similar to what they've done. They've done this research on longevity in the blue zone countries. It's the same. It's a similar idea, right? They're in different parts of the world, but they're on the same line, right, on the equator or a bit above it, and so they have similar longevity traits.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of a little bit like that. So I like kind of seeing those kind of common threads. And I've always been fascinated with space, and I had a foray into this, and I got very close to going, and so that would have been something, something that I would have aspired to.
So we're going to end, Omar, with what I call the quick fire round. Are you ready? Get set, go. Crowds or solitary?
Solitary.
Mountains or ocean?
Mountains.
Reckless or calculated risk?
Reckless.
Favorite activity?
Writing.
What kind of writing?
I'm mainly a storyteller, and it's my story is the story that I tell the best, and so I'm writing. Been in the process of writing a memoir for some time.
And are you doing that with someone or alone?
Alone.
It's hard. Okay, that's another conversation. We'll chat about it.
Yeah.
What's your least favorite activity?
Ooh, washing dishes.
Okay. All right. The last three are sentences that you have to finish. I have a hard time
communicating with. I have a hard time having shallow conversation.
All right. I can't get through the weekend without.
I can't get through my weekend without a bit of the outdoors.
And is there a special form that you want that to take? You live in Suma Bay, so is it swimming, surfing?
Yeah, swimming. There's a lot of snorkeling here. It's very rich. And just going kind of walking like barefoot around.
Nice. The last one is I get joy from
simplicity. Yeah, just bringing down everything to the absolute kind of basics.
Perfect. That's wonderful, Omar. I really enjoyed that. You were in my first season. Our episode was in my first season. So this is, a long way away from that. You've done a lot since then. And so this will be wonderful to have an update on what you've been up to.
Amazing.